John, the Premier League said they have the fund 125 million, I think, for the lower league clubs. Do you think, one, that's enough? And do you think this was the right thing to do, or maybe it took a bit long for them to make that decision and pledge that fund?
It's nice for cash flow, the 125 million, but the problem that lower league clubs are going to have is that that's an advance on future solidarity money. So in August, the clubs are going to have the same problem. So they can plug the cash flow hole now and pay April's wages. But in terms of going on in the future, I think there's going to be an ongoing problem, and we're just going to have to keep solving that as we go along. Like I said, hopefully if the Premier League doesn't have to rebate any of the broadcast money, that frees up some money maybe for them to help the football pyramid. In terms of the timings of it, the whole thing's been a bit mixed up because there's been a lot of pressure last week on footballers and the Premier League to make a decision. But in reality, the only decision that had to be made last week was from a PR perspective, because April's payroll isn't paid until the end of April. So there's no huge rush. I spoke to the managing director at our club, and he sort of said, if there's any changes we need to make to the April payroll, we can do it on the 28th of April if we need to. And that applies for the majority of clubs up and down the leagues. And so they're just taking their time and making sure that they come to the right decision. And there's a lot of factors in that. And it's not straightforward. But I think that money will definitely help, but it's still further down the line going to cause problems if the cash flow doesn't keep coming into the game.
John, I think I'm going to editorialize a tiny bit here, but the way this whole thing has been framed at Premier League level and whatnot, you had the statements from Matt Hancock, who's the health secretary, telling people to do their part. From what I can see, and maybe I'm misreading him, Gordon Brown may not be the most likable figure, and there are issues to wonder about whether he's worth every penny of his enormous salary, and whether also over the years maybe he's been a little bit too much in bed with the Premier League owners. But equally, when he said, we want to see all the numbers and all the figures, we're willing to take a pay cut, but we want to see all the numbers and all the figures so that we know exactly where this money is going and how it's being used. That seemed to be entirely reasonable, because there are some Premier League clubs that do not have an imminent cash flow problem because they've been very profitable, or because you're set up differently, or because their timing of their payments is different. I kind of feel like this message is, even though he said it several times, it's kind of been lost in the conversation. Now, from what I understand in the Football League, not your club so much, but we've all watched the Sunderland Till I Die thing and whatnot. And I know finances are a lot murkier and a lot less transparent even than they are in the Premier League. Speaking on a personal level, I know you're looking for a collective deal. Do you think footballers would be more willing to go and reach a compromise if they knew exactly what the state of their club's finances was across the board? Yeah,
I think so. There's a couple of issues that have probably arisen from that. Number one is the collective deal is what the governing bodies are proposing. So the Premier League last Friday proposed that a 30% wage cut / deferral would plug the £1.1 billion hole that they're seeing in their finances. And I think there was a lot of misunderstanding in that statement. The Premier League were putting that out there to say, this is our recommendation because these are the losses. But ultimately, the negotiations will have to happen at local level because each club's finances are unique, and some have got billionaire owners, most have got billionaire owners, but some haven't. And
sorry, in the interest of fairness, I have to jump in there, point out about billionaire owners that some of them may be asset rich, but it doesn't mean that they're cash rich. Because look, I know billionaire owners are very popular. They form an important part of our listeners. So I need to point out to them that, we really should feel sorry for them, because many of them have a lot of big assets, but not a lot of cash on hand. Not always, just in the hundreds of millions.
I think that you pointing that out and stepping in there is poignant, because there's a difference then between perception and reality, where the Premier League players are coming from a position of negotiation with perception, and probably my perception. And they're going, hold on a minute, my club's owned by billionaire owners. I'm not taking a pay cut because I'm not going to line their pockets. I'd much rather have a pay cut that goes directly to the NHS, and that's actually what the Premier League position is. And I do understand actually the Premier League are coming back and saying, yeah, the pay cuts don't go into line chairman's pockets. They're going because the cash has gone out of the Premier League as well. And while some of these chairmen are asset rich and they're billionaires on paper, it doesn't mean they have the cash flows to sustain these hundreds of millions of pounds wage bills. So I think you're right on that point, and that's where the Premier League and the players are at different ends of the spectrum, and the perception versus reality is different, and that's what makes it even murkier, because a lot of the pressure came last week from, say, Tottenham furloughing the non-playing staff, and that reflected badly on Tottenham, and then somehow on the players. It was as if the media pressure was that Tottenham players had refused a pay cut and therefore Tottenham had to furlough the staff. That obviously wasn't the case. The Premier League players were in ongoing discussions about what they would do. But the overwhelming feeling of Premier League players is that they're perfectly willing to take a wage reduction, but they want their money to go to good causes, and they want their money to go to non-playing staff at the clubs, and maybe to support the Football League pyramid further down. Now, it depends who you believe. The Premier League is saying, that's great, lovely sentiment, but we need the money for our clubs. And there's a divide there at the moment. So last night, the footballers came out with the statement saying, we're running a foundation, it's players together, we're putting a lot of money in this, and it's going to charitable causes, mostly the NHS. And it's a brilliant directive. But the Premier League, I think, is still going to argue that that's all well and good, but we're still in financial trouble. Now, the PFA's role in all of this is exactly how you laid out earlier, and they've probably got a lot of negative press, slightly unfairly, because first of all, they're saying we've got a lot of time to negotiate deals at a local level, and we have to represent not only individual clubs, but then there's individual players within individual clubs as well. So there's some Premier League players that can't afford to take a 30% pay cut because they're not on anywhere near 70 grand a week. Much like there's plenty of players in the lower leagues who are on 800 quid, 400 quid, 200 quid a week, and they can't afford the pay cuts as well. So the blanket recommendations come from the Premier League and the EFL. Then clubs also have a blanket recommendation within their club, and then some players can take that and some players can't, which makes the whole negotiation process extremely, extremely tricky. And I think that the PFA stance of saying, look, we'll go into clubs and look at their finances and take it on a case-by-case basis is probably the most sensible thing to do. So how that pans out, I don't know, but there's probably also a slight, there'll be a slight bite point where footballers look at their individual clubs and they have to balance off the benefits, or say the negatives of taking a pay cut versus the benefits of keeping their club alive. That's something that footballers have never had to do in the past and probably never have to do again. But we're all contracted. We don't have to forfeit our contract, but the clubs will say, well, if you don't, we won't be able to give you a new one in 6 months' time because we'll be out of existence. So I know there's a lot of things in there, but I hope that sort of makes sense. Do you in other European countries in the big leagues, it seems that it's more straightforward. Gab being Italian, me being French, and we across all what's happening in other leagues, there hasn't been that debate and the bad publicity for footballers in France, in Italy, in Spain, where each club is doing their bit, whether it's a wage cut, donations, whatever. It seems that only in England the footballer is the bad guy. Do you understand? Is it down to the mentality here? As a PFA board member, do you get it, or you really think it was unfair, or you could have done, as in players, could have done things differently maybe to avoid that? Yeah, from a PR perspective, I think the players probably got it wrong, and a lot of that was, again, and I've said it was timing. There didn't seem to be any rush until Tottenham decided to furlough the staff, and Matt Hancock and then Julien Knight said, what's going on here? What are the Premier League players doing? Now, I think that I'm not entirely sure about, for example, the perception of footballers in European countries, but certainly in England, there's a real negative perception of footballers in general. And a lot of that's media driven. and anything footballers do wrong, they jump on the bandwagon. And it was a shame that that Matt Hancock decided that now was the right time to have a snipe at footballers, when in reality they were. I think Jordan Henderson-led group was doing a lot anyway behind the scenes to try and formulate what we saw last night. And it's one of those things. The football in this country's got rich off media sensationalism, and the Premier League's such a big brand that we do have it the good way as well, where Sky Sports and BT and Amazon build it up to such an extent that we make a hell of a lot of money out of it, and that filters down to the lower leagues as well. But on the flip side, it means that footballers now occupy front pages as well as back pages as well, and it's part of the negative landscape, I think, of being a footballer in this country, that you can't walk down the street without really being criticised and scrutinised. And there's quite an amusing article the other day, I think, where one of the journalists pointed out that soon that Raheem Sterling will be blamed for COVID-19. It's true. That's the sort of way. That's the way things go in this country. And people are demonised 1 minute. Beckham in '98. I was old enough to remember. He was hated, absolutely hated up and down the country. Yeah,
and that's the way of the world. Yeah, you build them up and knock them down. Look at Wayne Rooney too. Ronaldo was hated here for years after the 2006 World Cup, and now he's an icon. He's a hero even over here. So it happens. It's one of the. I don't think it's particularly healthy, and I think it seems that. I haven't necessarily kept in touch with what's been happening on the continent, but it seems that everybody's been dealing with it in a lot more sensible manner. We haven't really been able to do that in England, and we never can when it comes to football.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.